Hello everyone, welcome to the third Brain Innovation Days virtual event. I hope you're all comfortable at home or even in the office, and I'd want to welcome you for an hour and a half of real concrete discussion. As you may know, it's been a 6-month journey of this Brain Innovation Days, and we're kind of coming to a fork in this journey. And today we're going to focus very much on actually the last year, because the last year has impacted the entire world. I'm obviously talking about COVID-19, and we're going to go into the heart of the discussion of how COVID-19 has impacted the brain research sector. So I just want to let you know that you're over 200 people that have registered for this particular event, which really makes us believe that there's so much interest in what is going to be discussed and what's been discussed previously. I also want to say that we want to interact with you as much as possible. So before introducing the speakers and the panels, I want to let you know that you can interact. There is the interactivity panel where throughout the event you can ask your questions through Slido. We're going to try and get as many questions from this and then ask speakers different questions that come up. But more importantly, right now, I want you to think about how COVID-19 has impacted you, your work, and share with us one word. And afterwards, I'm going to collect what has been shared, and we're going to bring up the words that come up the most. Whilst you think about your word, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It is Monica Di Luca, the President of the European Brain Council, who is going to welcome us all with her keynote. Welcome.
Welcome everyone to this Brain Innovation Day event, which is part of a one-year virtual celebration of brain innovation. My name is Monica Di Luca, and I am the President of the European Brain Council, which is one of the founding partners of the Brain Innovation Days. One of the major aims of these days is to create synergies and showcase the importance of innovation in the brain space. And this is why we are so excited to welcome so many of you today. I know that already 139 have been registered for this event, and we really have a great support for high-level speakers. So I'm really always excited to see the support and the interest in brain innovation from so many different stakeholders across the brain ecosystem and beyond. Today, we will cover another important theme that is linked to the challenges posed by the current pandemic to all of us in many different aspects of our life and our work. And we will hear today from many voices in the community of the impact that the pandemic had on their work. And it is also absolutely clear to all of us that the COVID-19 posed a threat also in citizens in general, and particularly on those living with the brain conditions or with other pre-existing conditions. As a positive and important aspect, however, COVID-19 demonstrated once more, if needed, that research is fundamental for the health of our society, and succeeded in accelerating innovation in science, availability of treatments, healthcare and health management, and made health a political priority and brought the importance of innovation in science to political realizations. So I really hope that we will be able to capitalize on this positive aspect of this pandemic and keep a continuous support for research. We have an impressive lineup of speakers today with us. So without any further delay, I hand you over to the Brain Innovation Day studio. And I thank you again for joining us. And I really hope you will enjoy this new Innovation Brain Day event.
I would like to thank Monica for this first address. I hope it set the tone for all of you. And I'd like to welcome Fred Destrebec, Executive Director of the European Brain Council. Welcome, Fred.
Hi, Jess.
So Fred is going to be doing most of the work today and moderating all the panels. But before we go into that, I just want to say it's been a rather exceptional year, unexpected, and it's impacted everyone and everything, and clearly the brain research sector. But what's it actually done to innovation?
Well, actually, Jess, what we can say, the least we can say is that the last 12 months were really extraordinary, far beyond anything that we could possibly imagine. It meant a lot of tragedy and difficulty for a lot of people living with a brain condition, the professionals looking after them, researchers trying to find solutions to carry on the research and the innovation in the space. So clearly there was a need to adapt. But also what we could see with COVID-19 was a great success of health research and health innovation with the release of vaccines to people in a matter of a year or so. At EBC, we have a policy paper that was released last month, a policy roadmap on brain innovation and improved outcomes for people living with a brain disorder. And what I can say is that the recommendations of this document have never been so important given the impact of the crisis.
Well, absolutely. And if you're saying that it's at the European level that there's already been reaction and an understanding that the sector has been impacted for the worse, but also maybe for the good. It's made people move, work together, and there's really a cohesion that might have happened to accelerate things. And maybe our first speaker could go into that detail.
Yes, definitely. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker of today, Professor Michel Goldman. So Professor Goldman is the president of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovative Healthcare and the former director of the Innovative Medicines Initiative. So Michel, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Actually, a lot has already been said and by a lot of experts, and including yourself, in the media and in workshops like this one. But I wanted to ask you very specifically, when we talk about lessons learned about COVID-19, what would be your perspective or your take on that?
Well, my first message, and first of all, thank you for having me. You know that brain research, and especially in Europe, is very close to my heart since my mandate at the Innovative Medicines Initiative. So it's a real pleasure to be with you. And my first message would be that what we have learned is really the power of science and the power of open science, of collaboration, of collective intelligence. What has been possible in less than a year is really the incredible efforts of scientists around the world. Remember that it starts in China. Just a few weeks after the first case emerged, the Chinese scientists decided to publish the full genome sequence of the SARS-CoV-2. And immediately in the days after, the labs which around the world had vaccine platforms for other related virus could immediately start to produce vaccine candidates. And as you know, this has been the work done by several academic teams, also biotech companies, and as soon as it appeared that the first candidates were promising, as you know, the big pharmas jump in the field. And it is with this extraordinary effort, which I must say was in a way heavily supported by the regulatory agencies, which indeed succeed to work differently from the past, that vaccines could be approved and finally deployed. Now, I must say that if you compare this with what has been done by the political leaders, if you compare this with what has been done by some people in the business world, I think that there it was quite less successful. And the reason why, the reason is that it has been really very difficult to translate into practice lessons learned from previous pandemics, lessons learned from the experience in Asian countries. I will just take one example, which is the importance of asymptomatic persons in transmission of the virus. This is known for years, and perhaps some of you are aware of this story in New York at the time of the typhoid fever, where it was very clear that people without symptoms were really transmitting the infectious agent. And there are other examples, and I really think that we should emphasize the success of science and the importance of basic research supporting this science. And I think that really at the European Brain Council, you are at the forefront to promote basic science as an essential instrument to move forward, to bring new therapeutic solutions to our patients. And those are not only drugs, medicine, it can also be medtech product devices and things like that. For this, that the second message, we need collaboration. And I must say that although science has been extremely successful, I think that we could have done and we should do better in terms of involving patients in key decisions to fight the pandemics. And the recent discussion about, the benefit risk balance of a vaccine is an excellent example of this.
But yeah, Michel, exactly in preparing this event, you were talking to me about the importance and the key importance of partnerships. Maybe you would like to expand on that and explain better the role that you see in the key actors in the system.
Well, I think that partnerships should go beyond, academic teams working together or with biotech companies. We really have, from the very beginning, to involve other key stakeholders, starting from the patients. We are at a time where difficult decisions have to be made, not only regarding vaccines, but also regarding therapies. Myself, I'm really striving to get monoclonal antibodies neutralizing the virus available for patients who don't or will not respond to vaccines. And for all these, we really need patient advocacy. But patient advocacy, again, based on science. And that's, I think, very important. So patients should be part of the partnership. And may I take this opportunity to suggest that organizations like yours, for example, with EUPATI, the European Academy for Patient Information, which actually was launched during my mandate at the IMI. I think that regulators have also a very important role to play in those partnerships. And I think that Europe is in a very good position. We demonstrate, and we are still at the forefront of collaborative research, and we should really capitalize on this, not only to fight COVID-19, but also other major medical threats, especially, of course, those affecting the brain. And I would like to emphasize here, there was a recent paper in Nature demonstrating, the incredible burden of mental disorders, brain disorders, already apparent after and during and after the pandemic. And we have good reasons to believe that this will just increase. We have still to discover many probably severe long-term consequences of COVID-19, especially on the brain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And our panelists to come will provide a deep dive on these questions. Michel, you're actually asked to participate in many events, and someone in the audience heard you say last week at a workshop, and I'm going to quote what is being said on Slido, that public-private collaborations in the EU was a disaster. And these are your words. What did you mean exactly by that? And if that's the case, what is actually needed, according to you, to restore this type of collaboration?
Yeah, you know, this is a bit outside the context of the discussion, but what has been indeed a disaster is the way the European Commission, and it's not to blame the European Commission. The European Commission is very much dependent on member states, but the way as Europeans we address the pandemic and especially the deployment of vaccine was, in my perspective, a disaster, because we focus on the commercial aspects, on the procurement of vaccine, without organizing the across Europe collaboration on recommendation for lockdown exit, for example, on recommendation on how to address the very important questions around the variants. How do we address the question of prioritization of citizens and patients for vaccines? And the results has been a disaster, because countries develop their own strategy without collaboration with the others. Just look at the countries ordering vaccines outside the procurement. Just think about countries which use their own national agencies to move forward with neutralizing therapeutic antibodies, and so on. And look at the different scientific committees which advise the national governments. There is no harmonization. And that's why we are now living in a situation where the public at large doesn't understand. How can you understand that in Belgium, you are a 42-year woman, you will get the AstraZeneca vaccines that you will not get in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, or in Spain? How can you explain this to the public? So this really creates and amplifies the distrust. And that's why, if I use the word disaster, that's probably the type of things I had in mind.
Thank you, Michel. And actually, I think it's really spot on and quite compelling, because, given we would like to learn the lessons of the crisis, this last message you conveyed is probably the first one we can take away from the event. Actually, I'd like to mention that we are still to hear from the Commission, as they did not respond to our invitation to join this event. So I'm afraid that after the sofa gate, we will have the empty chair gate at the Brain Innovation Days. Michel, I have another question on the impact and your views on the, let's say, undesired effects of COVID-19, but also potentially of vaccines on the brain and on brain disorders. What would you say on that?
Well, I think what's very important to realize is that really the threat is the virus. So I think that we should be extremely careful. Myself, I'm clearly not happy with the recent decisions of the Belgian government, because they create confusion. But I think that the priority is just to accelerate vaccination, to protect, immunize as many people as rapidly as possible, as it is very well done in the UK, very close from us, and in the United States, just to take these two examples. And indeed, Europe is slow, but I think that to accelerate, we should at the same time make sure that we keep public confidence. In some countries, especially France, but also in some parts of Belgium, vaccine hesitancy is there. So that's why when we talk about side effects, especially cerebral vein thrombosis, we should be careful. At the same time, we should acknowledge they are there, the link exists, and that's another major scientific achievement. It's because we had very skilled hematologists in UK, in Norway, in Austria, Germany, that those very rare events came to light. And I think that what we should say, it's there, it's extremely rare, and it should not in any way prevent the efficient deployment of the vaccine. And we should remember that the brain damage created by the virus are really actually a dominant feature of the disease.
Thank you very much, Michel, and thank you for joining this event. I'd like really to thank you for your contribution, and actually we'll stay in touch because there are many more questions coming in, and I'd like to suggest we continue the discussion beyond the event of today, thanks to you, but we need to move on, and thank you again for joining.
With pleasure, and I wish you a very fruitful event.
Thank you. So we are now moving on, and Jess, I'd like to welcome you again for the results of the word cloud.
Yes, well, I'd like to also thank Michel Goodman because he was spot on. He talking about, actually it's quite inspiring, these scientists working together at the same time. There's been impacts on people that's undeniable, and actually it hits exactly what you in the public have come back, because we've taken the key words that keep coming up, and there's three of them: mental health, teleworking, and chronic conditions. Clearly, this is the three things that are impacting the most of you. And could you bounce back on these three key words?
No, definitely, Jess. I would like to simply to say that the impact, as we can say, is across the board at many, many levels. In a statement that we released in January this year, we were trying to summarize that. You mentioned mental health, but a lot of patients living with the neurological conditions are actually equally impacted. And I just look forward to the next panel to have a deeper insight on the exact consequences that are meant here.
I'll let it for you, and let's go straight into it with pleasure.
So I'm really pleased to introduce this first panel, and I would like to welcome Professor Matilde Leonardi from the Besta Institute in Milano and chair of the Working Group of WHO on Essential Services in Neurology, Professor Peter Falkai, the president of the European Psychiatric Association and psychiatrist in Munich, as well as Professor Elena Moro, full professor of neurology in Grenoble and Secretary General of the European Academy of Neurology. Matilde, I'd like to turn to you first to ask your perspective and the perspective of the group that you are chairing for WHO on how the whole community was impacted by COVID-19, and what were the adaptations that you could notice in your work.
Thank you. Since March 2020, the WHO has been putting in place a group called the WHO Neuro-COVID Forum, particularly exploring the effects of the COVID-19 into the neurology and the neurological field of adults, children, and all allied professionals. And during the 12 months that have been passing so far, there has been some survey that WHO has been putting in place to understand what is the effect of COVID, not only on patients, but in particular on the services that health services have been impacted all over the world. And the Pulse survey, there has been two major ones that have been addressing the issue of what is happening to services. We're focusing in general on all the services, health services in primary, secondary, and tertiary care. Not so much attention was given in the broad and general WHO survey to the neurological services. This is why in July and August, the Division of Mental Health started with a specific survey on mental health and neurological and substance abuse services. It was not really focusing on neurology, and that is one of the issues that is in fact at the heart of the WHO Neuro-COVID Forum. Most of the government, 130 governments, replied to the WHO through their advisors, and usually advisors to mental health speak about the psychiatric and substance abuse services, putting the neurological services in a sort of a neglected area, because although the neurological patients are those who are providing the highest burden, it was as if governments were unable to report in a systematic manner what is the effect on neurological services. This is the reason why in last year the WHO has been commissioning a specific review of the effect of COVID-19 into neurological services. And together with one of the 4 task forces of the WHO, and I'm chairing the task force on services disruption and mitigation, we have been looking at the 390 papers that came out from the first wave of the COVID. Of course, the first wave and the publication were mostly coming from high-income countries, because most of the publication, more than 60% of publication that we have been doing in the system, collecting in the systematic review, they were coming from UK, Italy, Spain, and US. This is explained mostly because of the issue that the virus was, in a sense, coming to waves in the different countries, and the first wave was affecting mostly these countries. What was coming out from the survey on the review on the services was that almost all services were affected, but mostly, what was mostly affected was the outpatient elective services, for several reasons. One of them was that transportation was affected all over the world, and where the virus was coming, and deployment of personnel from neurology to the acute and the emergency care, and also fear of patients to go to the hospital or to the tertiary care. Also, what came out very clearly is that almost no patient or scientific association was contacted by governments when defining the public health guidelines for facing. And I think this is also the first recommendation that is coming out of the work that we are doing with the WHO, is that there is a need for neurology to be where health policies are developed. And this is something that is also a message for association, both of patients and scientific ones. Given the results of the review, what then the group decided to do was a survey from a bottom-up approach. What is happening to neurology? What is happening to neurological services? And how neurological services are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the survey was done involving 40 international associations dealing with neurology, adult neurology, child neurology, neurosurgery, neurophysiology, all allied professionals dealing with neuroscience, both research and education. The results of the survey are going to be published in the next weeks, but what we can already say is that while in the first review of paper, it was not clear the effect. Now that the pandemic is proceeding, it is clearly that some outpatient services have been affected even more than we were expecting, providing to patients who have chronic long-term condition, and I think the keywords that have been mentioned are saying this. There is a lot of non-communicable disease impact, and between the non-communicable disease, the neurological ones are creating the major burden. And all the outpatients have been affected, and the restorative techniques that have been put in place are different and are very much varied between the different countries. All the governments report that the first mitigation strategy has been telemedicine. But telemedicine might have very different colors, I would say, in the different countries for several reasons. Most of our patients in neurology are also patients that might have an advanced age, they're quite aged, they might have some neurodegenerative conditions, so telehealth might not have been the first choice for all of them. But beside this, as WHO is not only looking at Europe, but is looking at all the countries of the world, we are now seeing with this survey at the second and third wave, because we are referring to November, in which also most of the low-income countries are affected. And what it is coming out very clearly is that one population that is always and often very much neglected is the children with neurodevelopmental disability. And they are affected for two reasons. They had a stop of schooling, most of the schools were closed, and they had a stop of rehabilitation. So in fact, rehabilitation and neurorehabilitation, it is one of the most affected areas. And this is very much relevant because we are now exploring with the WHO group the post-COVID syndrome, meaning the effects of COVID, even in patients who are not so severe or hospitalized, And what we are coming out to in terms of numbers, and I think my colleagues might tell this better, is that 33% of those who had even a mild COVID are now presented with some neurological symptomatology, out of which fatigue, which is a central fatigue, is not peripheral fatigue, is the one that is having the heaviest effect. The mitigation strategy that are suggested come from, I would say, a motto. And I would take this from the colleagues that are usually working in mental health. Mental health is for all, it's not psychiatry. It's meaning that the well-being and the quality of life of everybody who has been directly or indirectly affected by the COVID has been touched. So we are saying that in a sense, there's no health without brain health. But in these times, it has become very clear that brain health is public health. So in brain health, we intend the basic science, but also all the different levels of care that has been shown. I mean, science is a result also of collaboration. I think this is what came out very clear. And the public health consequences that we are seeing with the neurological complication are enormous and underestimated, even by association. I think that the previous speaker has been saying that patients' association need to be involved more. What it is coming out from the survey is that patients' association has not been so much involved in the policy decision, but not all patients' neurological association are very strong. There are patients' associations that are not organized in terms of management in a manner that during an emergency like the one that we have are able to impact on governments. So the mitigation strategy require two major areas. We have been doing in 1 year what we were not able to do in the previous 20 years. So the jump into telemedicine is one of the mitigation strategies that mostly strikes all the observers, and also the idea of collaboration, that it is not only between the neuro world, but it is intersectoral. The collaboration between neurologists and cardiologists, given the cardiological and neurological consequences of the disease, have been increasing a lot and are bringing some very promising results for future collaboration and strategies. What it is really missing here is that public health implication of the neurological consequences of the virus have been underestimated. So there is also need, and this is one of the recommendations that I would say, giving the floor to the following, to learn in terms of public health implication and public health indication at all levels. I believe that the incredible effort that has been done by all the deployed neurologists, which are now also going back to their own patients who have been sort of missing some of the care that were deserving, particularly in the first wave of the COVID. As I say, some countries are improving. It requires a level of education in public health that sometimes neurologists do not have. And why it is essential? If you want to be a good lawyer of your patient, you need to know how policy and how services and system work so as to impact on them. And sometimes this knowledge is missing. I spoke yesterday with colleagues from India, and we speak with this Neuro-COVID forum twice a week, and we are 85 neurologists and societies from all over the world. And while we see the progression of the disease and the different phases of the disease, what it is coming clear is that we have been learning also a manner to work that we didn't have so much strong before, which is exchanging information like a major sisterhood and brotherhood of neurologists all over the world, trying to learn from the experience of others. And it was well said by the previous.
Thank you, Mathilde. I need to move on to our next speaker, but actually I'd like Elena later on to react to what you just said, and also mention that we'll hear from patients in our next segment of the event, and also mention maybe a few of the initiatives that were taken, like the One Neurology campaign that was now launched by EFNA and EN, that actually responds to what you just said and the need for patients to speak up and have a greater recognition of neurology specifically in the context of WHO. But thank you, Mathilde. We'll come back to you if time allows. I now would like to turn to you, Peter, to maybe have a particular focus in the field of psychiatry. And my first question to you was, in this context of the need for adaptation, can you tell us more about how telepsychiatry became a reality, what it meant for the patients that you are looking after, and for you and colleagues, and how it transformed actually your practice?
Well, thank you very much, Vero. I think it gave us the possibility to keep up with, well, first of all, three groups. One was our patients, because it was not that we closed down our facilities, but it was difficult for our patients actually to leave their homes and approach the hospital. So that way, starting with telephone and then going into telepsychiatry was a way to keep up on a regular basis. And I think that there are distant places where we would have needed telepsychiatry in the past. And now with this push, we are able even to reach more remote areas. The second, I think, bit of the population we reached are actually people who developed COVID and their relatives. So we immediately built up a telepsychiatric network within the hospital so that people could actually on their little diskettes have a psychotherapeutic intervention or just got some feedback about the health condition and so forth. And that was true for the relatives. And the third bit is the healthy population. And there I would subdivide those ones who are professionals, you know, dealing with COVID, having all these anxiety and problems, and healthy people. We know from follow-up studies in healthy population that roughly 10% of the healthy population have developed in the first wave anxiety, sleeping problems, and depressive problems. So I personally think that, I mean, a lot of things which are not good about COVID, but I mean, COVID helped us significantly in mental illness and mental health, actually to further develop telepsychiatry.
Thank you, Peter. But you mentioned a few of the consequences that you could notice retrospectively, but in your view, what would be or what can you see as the premise of the long-term consequences of COVID-19? I mean, it's all over the media, a lot of people talk about it. In a way, it's encouraging to see a greater recognition even by politicians of mental health that all of a sudden became a number one priority. But from your particular experience and perspective, what are the long-term threats that you can actually identify already?
Well, I would say there are two things, two big packages. One thing is dealing with, you know, the acute interaction between us humans and COVID. Sort of, even for healthy people, what does it mean? You know, actually home office or not having social contacts and interactions. And we are humans who'd like to move out, meet people. So for the healthy people, that means that even if COVID goes away, we actually have to deal with the fact we will change our way of communicating, our ways of traveling and so forth. So that is for the healthy bit. But if we look at people with mental disorders, I think we shouldn't take into account that 1 out of 4, so 25% of the population in Europe have mental illness. So these people are more vulnerable, and they are more vulnerable to stress. And COVID is clearly a stress. So that would mean it will worsen their illness. It will mean they have relapses, and it will mean we have more to watch this population. And then finally, there's another thing is the consequences, as was outlined by by the previous speaker, long COVID and consequences there. I think that beside somatic and neurological consequences, we know that because it's a CNS disorder, a disorder of the brain, it will certainly have long-ranging consequences, and fatigue was mentioned. We find particular kinds of chronic depression coming along. So I think we need to watch that, what COVID actually did to mental disorders and the sector of that.
Yeah, but Peter, you mentioned what Mathilde actually presented. For you, how does the future look like? And I think you were mentioning to me before the event that you can already also notice a rising anxiety with the link to vaccination? What is the world of tomorrow looking like?
Well, I mean, I like to say we need to learn to live with COVID. I mean, we always had this idea that pandemic conditions will affect us, but we had in Europe this idea, oh, this is somewhere else in the world. But we never had this experience that would go around the world and it would include Europe, and it actually hit us at the basis of our understanding of a free society moving, interacting, and living. And I think that we need to learn about what does it mean, you know, possibly being vaccinated once a year in order to stay healthy. There are a couple of people and they really don't like vaccination. They have anxiety, they fall off and other things. The second thing is we have these people who are anxious on viruses and the conditions. So we need to cope with this. We need to learn to cope with vaccination, to cope with anxiety, and to cope with the uncertainty. How does it look tomorrow? And I think that means that mental health actually needs to tackle and help the healthy population too, who are actually pressed by the current condition of COVID. And that will be a future topic for the coming years.
Thank you very much, Peter. I now would like to turn to Elena. Elena, thank you for joining this panel. We heard from Mathilde and from Peter very direct consequences, but can you tell us more a little bit, like what was the impact of COVID-19 on neurological care and how health services were impacted in your field?
So thank you very much, Fred, for inviting me, and I really want to add and insist on some points that have been already stressed. I think that the neurologists have shown quite a lot of agility and flexibility in adapting, above all, to the first wave, because I think we have to differentiate the first wave, the second, and the third, because what has been already said, there is a sort of learning curve. The first wave was brutal for everybody, and especially in the countries without infrastructure or big infrastructure, meaning a lot of beds for helping the patients with severe COVID to have the care. And as Mathilde said before, the neurologists in many countries were deployed. We have been helping pneumologists, also in the ICU, our colleagues to deal with these patients. And in the same time, we realize, as it was said before, that COVID has a neurological symptoms, neurological manifestation. And this was new because everybody was concentrating on the dyspnea, the pneumonia, and the ICU needs. And then we discovered, wow, there's some stroke in these patients, there are encephalopathy, encephalitis, and so on. So the neurologist been useful for the internal medicine, the ICU people, to complement the care of these patients. Then I think, as Mathilde said, the patients who were not followed with the chronic, above all with dementia, with Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and other migraine and other chronic issues, they have been paying a high price for that, because you remember, no admission to the hospital unless you have an emergency. And then we had to organize all these teleconference, video conferences. So I agree with Professor Goldman that we have to thank all our colleagues and people and the nurses, all the healthcare professionals. They're not only physicians to say thank you today, because they've been absolutely fantastic in helping. So this we have to be recognized. We did the best, I think, in that first wave, because we didn't know a lot about the disease, and it was brutal and difficult to manage. But the second wave, I think we have learned to be better organized, with the difficulties that we still like to have our private point of view, and we have difficulties in having a global political choices, but this is maybe a political problem. But still, the vaccination program has been maybe not the best in several countries, and we are paying this delayed compared to the United States, for example, or Israel. The other thing, maybe I can tell you right away, as a professor of neurology, we had to deal with the students, the medical students, the PhD students, the residents. They had to interrupt their studies. We have to reorganize everything with the online teaching. Remember that several students, they lost the income because they were dealing with maybe in the restaurants, helping, everything was locked down. And this was very, very difficult for several young students and generation who had to cope with that. And I think that they're still recovering. And the other thing that I want to point out is the clinical research. The clinical research was impacted on from several points of view. I mean, not on COVID, of course, but in several other clinical trials in Alzheimer, in multiple sclerosis and Parkinson. We had to close them. And we have a long waiting list of patients waiting for surgery, and we have still to recover.
Yeah, but actually, Elena, you're part of the Neuro-COVID task force of the EAN. You were mentioning to me the impact, and you rightly said that, the impact on patients, very direct and very impactful. But at the same time, you said those less direct consequences, like on teaching and research and all of that. So as Secretary General of EAN and member of other national societies, how do you see the role of such organizations to actually address the challenge, but also support professionals like yourself?
Yeah, it was already mentioned. I think that the biggest society like the European Academy of Neurology have the privilege to have all the local society, the national society, under the same umbrella. So what we decided to do was really to give the neurologist a service, updating the website, all the papers coming up about COVID and Neuro-COVID especially. We try to make the community sharing cases and problems with patients with Neuro-COVID. We had a survey about the symptoms and the signs and the diseases about in patients with COVID. We set up a registry, a global registry for patients with COVID and neurological manifestation for all health, for the global, not only for Europe, but for everybody, and also for following these patients in the long term, as was already mentioned, the longer term effects of COVID. So I think that, as was stressed before, has been an opportunity to federate together with all the neurological societies, not there is World Federation of Neurology, with the American Academy of Neurology. We try to work, the WHO, the Neuro Coalition, we try to work together for the community to help the neurologists, the patients, and we have been working also with EFNA, the European Federation of Neurological Association, to help also the patient with some recommendation for dealing with patients with neurological disease during the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much, Elena, and I would like to thank all our panelists, and thank you all in the audience for pouring so many questions into Slido. I'm afraid we won't be able to take them all, but clearly you've got my promise to carry on the discussions beyond the event, as we already did and will continue doing. I'd like now to move on, because we talked a lot about patients and patients sharing their voice and sharing their testimonies. Would like here to show you a video of a collection of personal testimonies of experts by experience. And here I'd like to thank personally EFNA and Gamian Europe for helping our team collect all these testimonies, but let's turn to the video right now.
During COVID-19 has been quite a turnaround, quite a change, given the impact that COVID-19 has had on all of us.
The appearance of this COVID generated fear and uncertainty. Having dystonia, I felt a greater emotional imbalance and increased my anxiety.
But now, because of the pandemic and staying at home, altogether it was too much for me, and I started to have severe mental health problems again.
My access to care was disrupted. I had to wait for months to be able to get my pain treatment at the hospital.
My care has been somewhat disrupted. Everything has moved online, and I'm at the situation where I'm now getting very used to it being online and understanding that it can actually be somewhat more of a benefit to me.
I could not do physical therapy for a long time, and no other therapist, and required face-to-face meetings, which affect my rehabilitation.
Because of the pandemic, which caused a lot of mental health problems, I was really unable to get the help I needed.
Lo que me ha facilitado es que las consultas sean telefónicamente, aunque las presenciales y pruebas esas sí se han ido atrasando.
We had something to learn, that digital tools are here for us, for patients, to help each other and to cooperate with the professionals. And for example, we had to see that applications are useful tools for getting better.
My appointments at the hospital was turned into phone calls instead of actually turning up at the hospital.
Digital tools helped me a little bit during the period when we could not meet face-to-face. Physiotherapists made online programs to follow, but it was not the same.
It was easier to contact my psychiatrist because I could easily call him via the app and have good conversation about what medication I should change and stuff. So that's something that I would like to have after COVID.
Tools that I use for receipt of care are really just my laptop here and my phone, my smartphone, and that has been sufficient to get me the treatment I need, to get me what I need to keep moving, keep motivated with what's going on in my life.
We've seen there are great opportunities when we can use technology well.
My ideal situation after COVID-19, and let's hope that it's very soon, it would be that I could have a mix of those things. I didn't know the app before. I never used video call before, and it has advantages, especially when I'm too depressed to go outside, take a train or bus and get ready and everything. I can just stay in my pajamas and talk to my therapist without having to move.
I hope those two will be continued, that I have the personal contact with my nurse and contact via the app with my psychiatrist. That would be the best of both worlds.
Michaela was invited to take part in a trial of a telepresent robot from the company No Isolation. This robot enabled Michaela to be able to participate fully in her schooling lessons.
We have now patients who are familiar with tools they never used before, and that is something, some message, some good message for the future.
Espero que con la investigación de esta se promueva también la nuestra y gracias.
So we are back in the studio, and before moving on to the next panel, we'd like to contribute a really warm word of thank you to all the contributors to this video and these personal stories. We are now moving to the topic on lessons learned from COVID and how these can be applied to brain innovation. So I'm pleased to welcome Aneta Tiskiewicz, who is Senior Manager for Digital and Data at the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry and Associations, as well as Florence Butelaine, who is the Senior Scientific Officer at the European Medicines Agency. So Aneta, I'm now first turning to you to maybe ask you your insight on the impact of this health crisis on the private sector and how did it adapt to it?
Yes, good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. So for those of you that are not acquainted with FPA, we are a federation that is representing the leading pharmaceutical companies and national associations. And our main mission is to innovate, discover, develop, and deliver new therapies and vaccines for people across Europe. So it goes without saying that from the beginning of the crisis, the expectations from our sector were pretty high. And the devastating human cost of the COVID-19 drove everyone involved in bringing new diagnostics, vaccines, and treatments to patients to adopt a mindset of simplifying and accelerating procedures. It has put enormous pressure on the scientific community, which has been called upon to produce research results in the fight against COVID as quickly and effectively as possible, revealing also how important our digital connection has become. We were witnessing an unprecedented global effort to translate science into solutions to one of our greatest ever challenges. At the same time, we as an industry, we have not stopped research for medicines for other diseases, and we were challenged to ensure the continuity of supply while some countries were closing borders. As for all stakeholders in the healthcare sector, and not only in the healthcare sector, COVID came on the top of all what we do, and revealed the need for a massive, concrete effort on a global scale in preparation for any future possible pandemics, requiring large diagnostic data collection and global early warning and rapid data sharing systems. On a positive note, we observed a greater use of a more adaptable and innovative approaches, such as innovative clinical trials, use of remote monitoring and teleconsultations, which were mentioned already today several times, that allowed us for the continuity of care, for the continuity of research, but also of clinical trials during the crisis, and also streamlined the regulatory processes. It also built up a momentum when it comes to the acceptance of new evidence in decision making. One of the key issues that arose during the pandemic has been one also of the healthcare systems, public health, and governments having insufficient or no relevant data on which to base critical decisions. The right data were not in the right place to answer the right question at the right time. Yet, despite all of that, we have seen a remarkable collaboration on the scientific response to the pandemic, from diagnostic to therapeutic and vaccines research and development. It was a collaboration at a much bigger scale and a much faster pace than ever before. So what sort of lesson we learn as an industry? That firstly, collaboration is a prerequisite for the breakthrough research. The technologies would allow us to adapt quickly to any situation, ensuring continuity of current research. And more effective transfer high quality data would enhance the ability to deliver care and boost preparedness for the potential future crises. And I'm really glad to hear that the collaboration, power of science, collective intelligence, that's the word that I heard quite often already during this event. And I'm really glad to hear that. It can only reiterate that that's also the same experience we shared in private sector.
Yeah, thank you, Aneta. And actually, I wanted to ask as a follow-up question, how do you see that this can be applied to the field that we are talking about today, brain innovation specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, well, we need to make sure we build back better. We cannot come back to the previous status quo. So the new normal should aim at decreasing complexity while ensuring the quality, safety, and efficacy of the medicines for patients who need them. We should remember that we have another medical emergencies that we should be responding to, such as Alzheimer and dementia. Although we had many sort of problems in order to address these challenges related to the inadequacy of source record and data systems with poor interoperability, and this has also impacted on our ability to conduct adequate research in a timely manner. There are still very few references, even already in the policy visions of post-COVID healthcare, to the principles and models of value and outcome-based approaches and patients-reported outcomes. The pandemic has acted as a catalyst for numerous developments in the clinical care, but there are still challenges that prevent us from the full exploitation. So we need the investments in the adequate infrastructure, interoperability, the quality of data, and I think the most immediate challenge is the better EU national coordination in terms of research collaboration, but also response to the pandemic. But also on a positive note, that we already see as industry opportunities to address these challenges now. As for example, the pharmaceutical strategy revisions with proposals that do not require changing the legislation, such as encouraging the use of new clinical trials, using real-world evidence in decision-making, and strengthening dialogue between the industry and regulatory authorities through the medicines development processes. So we know what we are being asked for at the very early stage. That would certainly translate into the faster delivery of medicines to patients. Also, the intention to create a trustworthy European data ecosystem with a transparent framework for increased access by innovators can unlock the value of data with benefits for patients. Also, we very much welcome the revealed last week first ever legal proposal on artificial intelligence, which would hopefully result in a more harmonized rules and boost development of AI systems in the EU with benefits for patients.
Thank you very much, Aneta, and stay tuned because I'm coming back to you. Actually, I like a lot of the things that you said because they are exactly spot on in regard to the policy roadmap that I was mentioning earlier on improving outcomes thanks to innovation in the brain space. Florence, I'm now turning to you, and thanks for joining us again in this BI Day event. You spoke at the recent Congress of the European Psychiatric Association, which is, let's say, more your field at your work at EMA. And we heard from Peter Falkile a few minutes ago that the impact in the mental health space is huge and is aggravating because of the crisis. What can the EMA do in this context?
Thank you very much. Yes, we were invited to the EPA forum recently. Well, for sure, I mean, what we are doing, we are also collecting information and seeing what the situation looks like, because obviously it's not only a pandemic that has affected the bodies, but also the mind and the overall well-being of the people. And what we've seen, it's despite that epidemiological data are still to be harmonized, obviously, in terms of methodology. And we'll see that they all go toward the same direction, that is an increased risk for disorders such as anxiety and depression, as pointed out by the previous speakers. And we know as well that in psychiatry, the effects are not expected to draw a bell curve, like in pandemics, and it's most likely that they will remain and get deeper in time. So it's very important to have a system in place that helps to have data that are reliable. So we have a baseline. We can know and monitor the situation from there. We can also see where are the needs and advise on research or plans that are needed, to tackle specific challenges in mental health. It's what is important, at this point in time.
Yeah, and Aneta just mentioned in her intervention that we needed to accelerate evaluation processes. So can you tell us more about that, and particularly in the ongoing context of having to fast-track innovation and the release of vaccines? Are there any learnings that we can factor into the system?
So yeah, we have a number of regulatory tools in place. We had them before the pandemic, and as we know, for the vaccine, there is a rolling review, which is a regulatory tool that allows data to be reviewed as they come. It's something that helps, obviously, and has helped to evaluate the vaccine much quickly than the current mechanism would have allowed. But still, we have a number of mechanisms already in place. We have the PRIME, the accelerated assessment. They can be combined together. And also companies are very welcome to come early to discuss different platforms like scientific advice, qualification advice, innovation task force meetings. So all of them can be combined, and but I agree that it's very somehow interesting the way that vaccine have been accelerated in their development and evaluation, and that makes us maybe think collectively as ways to try to create or develop further such a framework for other type of disease, which are also very important to consider in terms of public health, and for which there is still a high unmet medical need.
Yeah, and in the same vein, when we prepared this event and your participation, you mentioned to me a very direct consequence that you had to face at EMA on how COVID-19 impacted on the methodology that you had put in place and how you had to basically adapt, as well as the tools that you're using in the context of these evaluation processes. Do you have concrete examples maybe that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's also in line with what has been discussed. So the fact that for clinical trials, the fact that patients or investigators, may have been ill or may have been in sites that have become a confined area where there was a restricted access, for example, then obviously you have to adapt to that, because you don't want the trial to be stopped, and you don't want the trial to be extended for too long because of lack of recruitment, for example, or postponement of visits because the blood test is not feasible. So it's this is all of the challenges that the pandemic has put in the system to the system, and in terms of clinical assessment and remote consultation, that's something that the physician have obviously experienced as well. But in terms of clinical trials, it poses also a number of questions, because if you cannot go to the patient and you have to administer the scale remotely, is it the same reliability, the same validity, same sensitivity to change? So what are exactly the psychometric properties of these remote tools? And if you have, let's say, a clinical trial where you started with in-person assessment, but then you had to switch for remote assessment, how can you assess the whole set of data? Because you will have two ways of assessing the clinical improvement. So how can you ensure that also the population at the end will be a representative of the population you are targeting? So it's a lot of methodological challenges. So it's important as well, because if we are now moving towards more digitalization and digital medicine, digital healthcare, and also in the context of clinical trials, in a way, the situation was quite stressful and stretched the system to a big extent, but it provided also an opportunity to face challenges that hopefully we can learn something about and help to build up this future of healthcare.
Thank you, Florence. And I'd like to come back briefly to you, Aneta, to maybe reflect on some takeaways from this discussion. What would you flag up from Florence just said, and how would you react to that?
I think just linking to the last remark from Florence, indeed, I think there is a challenge to accept sort of the evidence generated by the digital technologies or coming from the sort of new sources of data. Anyhow, I think the solution would be to really have this sort of a guidance, harmonized guidance from the regulatory authorities on the acceptability of evidence generated from these sources. So that would be my key takeaway message. And I think that there is really a potential in sort of a more dynamic regulatory assessment, and we should look into that in order to also address the current unmet medical needs.
Thank you, Aneta. Florence, a word of response to that? We heard from other speakers earlier this need for harmonization. Now Aneta is mentioning more dynamism. So these are words that just are picked up and repeated. How would you respond to this for your conclusion?
Yeah, it's more personal, position here, but I can see, going to different meetings with learned societies, and also there was very recently this month a meeting with national authorities and EMA on this particular point. It's what comes up quite regularly is indeed that we need to speak the same language, we need to look toward the same direction and have a framework that is coherent and that we can all refer and relate to. So, and someone has also pointed out a publication from the Commission last week as well. So it's very important that we have this framework, creative, but also protecting patients and feasible for companies. To really try to develop those new tools in Europe, because we need those new tools in Europe, and it's coming fast, as we know. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Florence, and I'd like to reassure you that nothing that you said will be held against you. I now would like to turn to our third panelist, actually to provide us with a very concrete example of fast-tracked innovation in the context of COVID. I'm pleased to welcome Professor Samir Zuberi from the European Pediatric Neurology Society. And Samir, you're live with us from Glasgow, and would like to basically give you the floor to tell us more about this new platform that was created and how this very concrete innovation could be developed and made possible during a year of extreme challenges.
Thank you very much, Fred, and thank you for the EBC for inviting me to show you a concrete example of something that's been possible really because of COVID, something we wanted to do before COVID, but has been possible because of COVID. So I'm going to share my screen and show you the live presentation. So we're all interested in brain health, and when brain health is impaired, it manifests itself in many ways. In abnormalities of movement, in abnormalities of seizures, in mental health problems, in behavioral problems. And as neurologists, we use video a great deal to assess these things. All of us as neurologists use a lot of videos, but we've had challenges in having secure videos from patients to our clinical practice. We have 3.5 billion smartphones in the world, and we must find ways of using those smartphones to help us in our clinical management. So we were trying to develop this system for using smartphone video for clinical practice before COVID, but didn't get funding. But then with COVID, we were able to get funding from the Scottish government to set up a system where we were able to get videos from families directly into clinical services over a secure cloud-based platform. Now, this is just my demonstration system. It's not our real system. So it's called vCreate Neuro. So when we have a family that we want to register for the system, we invite them into the system like this. So with their clinical details, and we have various different classifications. So we can have a classification for epilepsy and paroxysmal disorders or movement disorders. And then this will allow us to determine what type of questions the family gets asked as they upload the video. We also have different types of person who will be uploading the video, patient, parent, and these allow us to then get consent for those videos for research as well. So the families register, and we send them an email and a text, and they do everything through their mobile phone. And when they're registered, then they become registered within the system, and then they can upload videos. They create a password, a passcode, so it's very much like online banking. And now we know that people are really familiar with this. I was really struck by what Mathilde said, that it is children with neurological disorders and learning disabilities that have been really impacted by the pandemic. And this is very much my constituency. So families will upload a video. So this is an example of a video uploaded by a family. Now, as I said, they get the opportunity to answer questions in a drop-down list. So these are the questions we would ask if we're taking an epilepsy history. So we're able to see these, warning signs before the event, etc., etc. What were they like after the episode? And then we can look at the video. So this is a video sent of a child just in the height of the pandemic from 100 miles away from Glasgow, from parents, and he's having a seizure, an infantile spasm. Now, this is in the height of the pandemic. We were able then to see that. We arranged for the child to come up to the Children's Hospital to have an EEG and get treated. Now, if you do not treat this condition rapidly, then these children can end up with significant learning disability. In our system now, we can classify the videos. So I can say this is 80% epileptic. I can classify by seizure type. I can classify by syndrome. I can also classify by many other methods, so and etiology as well, if I know the etiology. And so what this does is then this builds up in our system a whole library of videos for clinical practice, teaching, and research. So we always have also have a movement disorder pathway. So I can describe the movement disorder that I may get a video from the patient. And that's for adults and pediatrics. And I can even then register a genetic etiology in this system. So ultimately then I have a big library of videos. So we also have this now in district general hospitals in Scotland, and I can look at the videos within the systems of other hospitals. So I simply get an email saying, Samir, there's a video for you to watch in this hospital. I can log into that, and then I can put my opinion in, and then the local clinician will get that, get my opinion. So this system now is called VCreate Neuro. We have more than 700 of our patients in Glasgow in this system, more than 1,800 videos. Overall, we have more than 5,500 videos from all over the UK with more than 2,000 patients. And it's now in hospitals in Scotland and in England. These are all the hospitals on the green active centres. These are the centres in development. So patients love it because it gives them improved access. Clinicians find because you can rapidly see the videos of events, you can monitor your patients, you have reduced time to diagnosis, and it's very useful for treatment decisions as well. So we've worked very closely with family groups, so there's ease of use, access to clinical team, reassurance, empowerment, and safety are improved. And also we're saving money as well with this. So we're doing fewer investigations, fewer EEG tests, fewer hospital admissions, fewer inpatient stays. And also I think we're using less medication for epilepsy because we're seeing that many of the events, even in patients with epilepsy, are not seizures. So there are many benefits to this system. We have a parallel neurology video research database now that has national research ethics approval. And we're working with the International League Against Epilepsy to develop what we call the ground truth for seizure types. So we will then have this big database of videos which we can use for AI research moving forwards. We have international pilots in development. This has all happened in the last year. So we've been working with WHO, Tarun Dua in the Brain Health Unit. So we're going to be collaborating with them in a project in Africa, epilepsy improvement pathways in Africa. We have a project with Texas and Caribbean islands for some of the islands.
Samir, this all looks super impressive. I'm really thrilled by what you demonstrated. You mentioned that in order to develop that, the health crisis actually fast-tracked the investment from NHS Scotland into your system. Would you have other examples of hurdles that were lifted thanks to the health crisis?
Yeah, so the other thing was that security has been, the reason this type of system has not been developed in the past is because hospitals are anxious about transferring videos. Private companies do not want to handle video because it's so sensitive. So we were able to get security and governance agreed at a national level in Scotland, and this system has all the appropriate security approvals and GDPR for European level projects as well. So the Scottish Government, rather than having single hospital approval, went for a single national approval, which facilitated our use.
Yeah, but it's also a great example on how what was mentioned earlier by our panelists, like real-world data, real-world evidence can actually be validated and recognized and used in the system with very clear, concrete benefits and positive outcomes from the patients. Samia, I'm sorry, we'll have to turn to the conclusion of this event, but we definitely would like to come back to this vCreate platform and carry on promoting it, because, as you rightly said, if WHO is taking this up and your colleagues are increasingly using it, it clearly demonstrates the benefits out of it. And together with the International League Against Epilepsy or the International Bureau of Epilepsy, I think there is a great merit to carry this forward. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to the further promotion of this platform. We'd now like to move to the concluding remarks of this event.
Back to the studio, and thank you very much, Fred, for moderating these panels. We've clearly seen that there's been a huge impact, but there's also been a drastic take to innovate and to move forward. And obviously what I thought was very interesting is that we finally heard from patients that were impacted. And so unfortunately we're coming to the end, but I think we still have one final person that can maybe give us a bit of a conclusion of what we've talked about for the last hour and a half, Fred?
Yes, definitely. So we received an extensive view on the many issues and challenges linked to COVID-19 and the brain, but also encouraging messages and examples. So we've asked Dr. Thomas Ryan, who is the chair of the FENSCAVI Network of Excellence, to provide concluding remarks and takeaways from today. So Thomas, thank you for joining us from Dublin. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. So what is your take on all the many things that were shared with us by panelists and speakers? What are your takeaways?
Well, on behalf of the FENSCAVI Network, thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I'll be giving the perspective of an early to mid-career fundamental neuroscience researcher on the topics that we've heard today, going from the political situation to neurology and psychiatry in Europe, patient advocacy, and how we're going to respond to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic in terms of European brain health and brain research. I think one of the major issues surrounding all of this is harmonization of research ambition and also research practice across Europe, particularly in terms of research collaboration. We've all been affected in different ways. Those of us doing fundamental research, everything that we're able to do about neurology, everything that we're able to do about psychiatry comes from fundamental neuroscience research, which to a large extent has ground to a halt or a near halt for much of the last year. And we've been mitigating for this differently in different countries. And this has challenges, in many respects it has challenges for how we conduct animal research, for how we do human experiments, and how we make up for the lost time and effort that has affected the fundamental research community. And the challenges are extensive. There are challenges in funding, in terms of cost extensions for research grants and how career fellowships can be maintained. There are challenges with respect to mentorship. There is a growing lost generation of researchers at the PhD student level, at the postdoc level, and at the early career level that we are going to be mitigating for years to come. The fact of Brexit, which has coincided essentially with the COVID-19 pandemic, has produced huge challenges for European neuroscience on account of the United Kingdom obviously being and still being a huge contributor to European research, and barriers to collaboration in general. And I thought it was very interesting to hear Michael Goldman's introduction on the lack of harmonization in Europe and the lack of learning from Asian countries and how to manage a pandemic. Speaking from the perspective of Ireland, many of us here have found this very frustrating because it seemed clear to us here that if we were to adopt the Asian model or the New Zealand, Australian model for how to deal with this pandemic, that our situation in Ireland could be very different and therefore could be a model for how Europe could deal with the pandemic. However, the government in Ireland were unable and unwilling to make any of those decisions because it was accepted that we needed to follow Europe, that we needed to follow Europe as a whole. And as a result, we did not feel that we were able to act as an example for how Europe could be managing the pandemic in a better way. But on this topic of how we're actually doing research, what we've learned is that COVID-19 is not just about infectious diseases. COVID-19 is going to be changing brain health in Europe going forward. We're still learning about the effects of COVID-19 on the brain. There's a paucity of information here. I recently gave an undergraduate teaching lecture on brain health and disease, and I decided to summarize everything that was known on COVID-19 and specifically the brain. And I was surprised that it only took me 20 minutes to communicate what is known so far after a year to an undergraduate neuroscience class. And the reason for this is obviously, though the neurological studies have been very clear in the extreme cases of how COVID-19 can contribute to neurological symptoms, obviously it's going to take time to figure out how COVID-19 and long COVID is affecting the normal distribution of brain health in the population. But I think more than that, we haven't been able to do proper animal model research on COVID-19. There's two reasons for that. One is the incidental fact that most labs have been hamstrung for the past year and it's been difficult to do animal research. But more than that is that the original variants of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, doesn't infect rats and mice. It doesn't infect our principal model organisms. So you can't infect the rodent brain without specific transgenic mice. And now the new variants of COVID-19, of SARS-CoV-2 in South Africa and Brazil can infect a rodent brain. So we're going to be learning more and more about what it actually does to the brain. And I think that we have to recognize that we have a lot less knowledge about what this virus does to the brain than we think. We need to have a large degree of caution based on what we know about how Spanish flu led to a Parkinson's disease surge in the years after it. We also need to remember that apart from the fact that SARS-CoV-2 is infecting the brain directly, it's also going to have an unknown long-term impact in terms of neuroinflammation, particularly with respect to people who are pregnant when they were infected with SARS-CoV-2, and the effect of that maternal immune inflammation on children who have recently been born and who have yet to be born will be borne out over the next couple of years. And lastly, of course, there are going to be increasing mental health issues on account of the indirect effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to see increases in PTSD incidents in the European population. And the only way that we're going to be able to deal with these increased issues and also capitalize on the opportunities that exist for a greater recognition of the importance of brain health is if we find ways of supporting fundamental research in Europe to a greater extent. What's clear is that European funding has not been keeping up with the world in terms of neuroscience research. Though the recent budget did increase the Horizon Europe program slightly, it was not adequate. The amount of money assigned to the European Research Council is not adequate. The amount of money going to life sciences within the European Research Council is not adequate. In contrast, our colleagues in the United States are constantly increasing their research budget and will be further motivated and catalyzed to do so in the next few years, partly because of their changing political situation, but also directly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. If Europe does not respond to provide increased research funding for life sciences in general, that includes immunology and infectious diseases, of course, but it also has to include neuroscience and interdisciplinary science between neuroscience, infectious disease, and immunology. If we don't do that, we're going to suffer a significant brain drain in Europe. We're not going to be recruiting or retaining or training and mentoring the best researchers as we have been doing to the level of the last 5 years. And we're not going to be seeing the opportunities and challenges of the next 10 years. So it seems to me absolutely crucial that we start to reorientate brain health in Europe in a way that is reorientated around supporting and enabling fundamental blue skies research in order to empower and promote young researchers from all over the world to come and to work in Europe on brain science.
Thank you, Thomas. And I can only share the last comments that you actually made. And thank you for being with us today.
Back to the studio now. Well, we've never left the studio. And yes, I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone that was involved. I mean, once again, huge impact. There are some negatives, but I would also say there's some positives that have come out of all of this.
No, definitely, and we heard from Thomas all the concluding remarks. There is a lot to harvest upon, and a clear message to you all who are tuned in and who are going to watch us the recording of this event. Stay tuned and continue to follow us on digital platforms, because everything that was mentioned today is going to be released on our website. And as clearly we saw the need to carry on the discussion, there will be more podcasts that are going to come out from the discussions of today.
Thank you, Fred. So definitely get on the website, follow what's happening on social media. And Fred, I would like to say thank you to you for being the real moderator of today. It's tiring and interesting, and it takes a lot of energy. So thank you, Fred. A big thank you also to Monica, who chaperoned the whole 6 months, and to everyone else who's been involved, and especially to you back home. You've been 200 people getting involved, interacting. And before I say goodbye, I'd like to thank the team that you don't see that is managing the entire studio. So with that, I'd like to thank you and good afternoon to all of you. Bye-bye.